For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On the night of August 12, 1993, 6 American tourists boarded the luxury cruise ship Star of Egypt for what promised to be a dream vacation along the ancient Nile. Ross and Lauren Anderson, siblings Grace and Ethan Turner, and friends Kimberly Nelson and Ian Rodriguez, all from Chicago, settled into their adjoining cabins as the ship departed Luxor. By sunrise, they had vanished without a trace. Despite an extensive international investigation involving both Egyptian authorities and the FBI, the disappearance of the 6 Americans remained one of the Nile's most baffling mysteries. For 21 years, their families lived with devastating uncertainty, clinging to hope while fearing the worst. Then, in 2014, underwater archaeologists working near Aswan made a chilling discovery in the murky depths of the ancient river. This is the complete investigation into what happened to 6 tourists who vanished into the Egyptian night, and the dark secrets that lay buried beneath the Nile's waters for over 2 decades. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's continue. Dawn broke over the ancient waters of the Nile River on March 15, 1993, revealing an eerily quiet scene aboard the luxury cruise ship Pharaoh's Glory. The morning sun cast long shadows across the deck where, just hours earlier, 6 American tourists had shared drinks and laughter under the stars. Now, their cabin stood empty, beds seemingly undisturbed, personal belongings laid out as if their owners had merely stepped away for a moment. Ross Anderson and Lauren Murphy, a successful Chicago couple celebrating their 15th wedding anniversary, had meticulously planned this Egyptian adventure for months. They'd convinced Lauren's siblings, Grace Turner and Ethan Williams, to join them, along with their close friends Kimberly Nelson and Ian Rodriguez. Their social media posts and letters home painted pictures of wide-eyed wonder at the ancient temples and vibrant markets of Luxor. The previous evening, fellow passengers recalled seeing the group gathered on the upper deck around 9 o'clock. They were taking photographs of the sunset, planning their next day's excursion to the Valley of the Kings. Security footage, later recovered, showed them returning to their adjacent cabins just before midnight. It would be the last confirmed sighting of all 6 Americans. Maria Santos, a Brazilian tourist in the neighboring cabin, remembered hearing muffled voices around 2 in the morning, but thought nothing of it at the time. "I assumed they were just returning from the bar," she would later tell investigators. There was nothing to suggest anything was wrong. The first sign of trouble came at 7:30 the next morning. When the group failed to appear for breakfast, cruise director Mahmoud Hassan sent a steward to check their cabins. The doors were locked from the inside. After several unanswered knocks, security opened the doors to find the rooms pristine but empty. Passports, wallets, and cameras remained on bedside tables. Lauren's reading glasses sat atop an open novel. A half-empty glass of water on Ross's nightstand still held an ice cube, slowly melting in the morning heat. Hassan quickly assembled the ship's security team, initially suggesting the group must have disembarked at an unscheduled stop during the night. But as staff searched the vessel and checked passenger logs, his story began to unravel. No such stop was recorded in the ship's navigation logs. No tender boats had been launched. No port authority along the river reported any unexpected arrivals. By noon, panic had set in. The ship's captain radioed Egyptian authorities, and local police boats began combing the riverbanks. Passengers gathered in worried clusters on deck, watching helicopters sweep low over the water. The 6 empty deck chairs where the Americans had sat the previous evening became an impromptu memorial, their abandoned novels and sunglasses untouched by the crew. Back in Chicago, the first signs of trouble came via a missed check-in call. Ross and Lauren's daughter, Sarah, had arranged daily updates with her parents. When no call came that morning, she dismissed it as poor reception. By evening, with still no word, she began calling the cruise line's American office. The response she received was vague, non-committal, something about a possible unscheduled stop, a suggestion to wait another day. But there would be no word the next day, or the day after. 6 American tourists had vanished without a trace on the Nile, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense of dread. Their disappearance would launch an international investigation spanning 2 decades, revealing a dark undercurrent of crime beneath the glittering surface of luxury Nile cruises. And the truth, when it finally emerged from the depths of the ancient river, would prove far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. The morning of their disappearance marked the beginning of a mystery that would haunt 2 continents, leaving families shattered and exposing a deadly pattern that had gone undetected for years. But on that bright Egyptian morning, as the sun climbed higher over the timeless waters of the Nile, no one yet knew they were witnessing the opening chapter of one of tourism's darkest stories. As news of the disappearance spread through diplomatic channels, Inspector Ahmed Rashid of the Egyptian Tourism Police arrived at the Pharaoh's Glory within hours. A veteran of tourist-related investigations, Rashid immediately noted troubling inconsistencies in the initial reports. The ship had maintained its course after the disappearance was discovered, potentially destroying crucial evidence at the scene. Rashid's first interviews with the crew yielded little. The night security staff described a quiet evening, with routine patrols showing nothing unusual. Yet when pressed about specific times and locations, their statements began to contradict one another. One guard claimed to have seen the Americans in the lounge at 2 a.m. Another insisted the lounge had been closed and dark since midnight. Cruise director Mahmoud Hassan presented himself as helpful and concerned, but his explanation about an unscheduled stop grew more convoluted under questioning. When Rashid requested documentation of the ship's exact route and speed during the critical hours, Hassan claimed the navigation computer had malfunctioned, leaving a gap in the digital records. 3 days into the investigation, FBI agent Jennifer Parker landed in Luxor. Her arrival marked the first time the FBI had dispatched an agent to Egypt for a missing persons case, underscoring the unusual nature of the disappearance. Parker brought with her extensive files on the 6 Americans, painting a picture of successful professionals with no obvious enemies or financial troubles. The joint Egyptian-American investigation team faced immediate challenges. The ship's security cameras had captured the group returning to their cabins at midnight, but the system showed an unexplained 4-hour gap in recording between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. When Parker attempted to interview the ship's technical officer about the gap, she found he had abruptly taken leave for a family emergency. Family members of the missing tourists arrived in waves, bringing photos, personal histories, and mounting frustration. Grace Turner's husband described her as an experienced traveler who would never have left the ship voluntarily at night. Ross Anderson's daughter provided his detailed travel journal, with entries stopping abruptly the evening before the disappearance. The final page contained a cryptic note about unusual activity near the cargo hold that he planned to investigate. Inspector Rashid's search of the cabins revealed subtle but troubling details overlooked in the initial sweep. A small scuff mark on Lauren Murphy's doorframe, a broken fingernail caught in the cabin's carpet, a life jacket missing from Ian Rodriguez's room. Each piece suggested a story far different from Hassan's tale of voluntary disembarkment. The investigation expanded to other vessels in the area. A fishing boat captain reported hearing unusual engine activity in the middle of the night, a large vessel stopping for nearly an hour at a point where the Nile was particularly deep. But when investigators tried to locate him for a formal statement, they found his boat sold and the captain gone without a trace. As the first week drew to a close, Agent Parker discovered that 3 other tourists had vanished from Nile cruises in the past 2 years. Each disappearance had been attributed to passengers presumably leaving at unscheduled stops, but none had ever been found. Each case had been investigated separately, the pattern unnoticed until now. The families watched with growing despair as the investigation stalled. Cultural differences and jurisdictional disputes hampered progress. Egyptian authorities, concerned about tourism, pressed for a quick resolution. American diplomats demanded more aggressive investigation. And somewhere between these competing interests, the truth about 6 missing tourists seemed to slip further away with each passing day. Inspector Rashid and Agent Parker knew they were missing something crucial. The evidence pointed to a carefully planned operation rather than a random crime or accident. But with key witnesses unavailable, technical evidence compromised, and cruise director Hassan providing only carefully crafted answers, the investigation began to lose momentum. What no one yet realized was that the true horror of what happened that night would remain hidden beneath the Nile's waters for another 21 years. As weeks turned into months, the investigation into the disappearance of 6 American tourists from the Faroes' glory began to fade from international headlines. The initial flurry of activity gave way to a frustrating pattern of dead ends and unanswered questions. Back in Chicago, empty chairs at family gatherings served as painful reminders of lives interrupted, while in Egypt, case files gathered dust in the cramped offices of the tourism police. Sarah Anderson, daughter of Ross and Lauren, made monthly calls to the American embassy in Cairo, each time receiving the same gentle but firm response: no new developments to report. She maintained a wall calendar in her kitchen, marking off the days since her parents vanished. By the end of the first year, she had filled 3 calendars with X's, each mark a silent testimony to another day without answers. The families watched helplessly as jurisdictional battles hampered progress. Egyptian authorities, eager to protect their vital tourism industry, began downplaying the case. The FBI's involvement was gradually reduced, with Agent Jennifer Parker reassigned to other cases despite her protests. Inspector Rashid found himself increasingly isolated, his requests for additional resources denied by superiors who suggested it was time to move on. Similar cases began to surface, creating a disturbing pattern that went largely unnoticed. In 1994, a German couple disappeared from another Nile cruise ship. The following year, an Australian family of 3 vanished under nearly identical circumstances. Each time, the same explanation was offered: tourists presumably disembarking at unscheduled stops, choosing to continue their journeys independently. Each case was investigated separately, the connections overlooked or deliberately ignored. Grace Turner's husband maintained a website dedicated to the case, posting updates that became increasingly infrequent. The site's visitor counter slowed to a trickle. Media anniversaries of the disappearance moved from front pages to brief mentions in local newspapers. The mystery of the Faroes' glory became another cold case, filed alongside countless other unsolved disappearances. Mahmoud Hassan continued his work as cruise director, his carefully crafted explanations accepted without question by a tourism industry eager to move forward. The missing Americans became a whispered story among Nile cruise staff, a cautionary tale that grew more distant with each passing season. In Chicago, the families established a memorial scholarship in their loved ones' names at the local community college. Every March 15th, they gathered at the lakeshore, releasing 6 lanterns over Lake Michigan's waters. The ceremony became smaller each year, as friends and extended family gradually accepted what the immediate families could not, that they might never know the truth. Inspector Rashid kept the case file on his desk, reviewing it periodically between other investigations. He noted similar disappearances with growing concern, but without concrete evidence, his warnings went unheeded. The file grew thick with possible connections and theories, but no hard proof emerged to tie the cases together. The tourism industry along the Nile continued to thrive. New luxury cruise ships joined the fleet, their brochures showcasing the same route the pharaoh's glory had traveled. Passengers snapped photos of ancient temples and stunning sunsets, unaware they were floating past the scene of an unsolved tragedy. By 2013, 20 years had passed. The case remained officially open but effectively abandoned. The families had aged, their grief hardening into a quiet resignation. Sarah Anderson's calendar marking had stopped at year 10, though she never removed the previous year's calendars from her wall. Grace Turner's husband had passed away, his website frozen in time with its last update from 2005. What no one could know was that beneath the Nile's murky waters, evidence lay waiting. The river had kept its secret for 2 decades, while families mourned and investigators moved on. The truth about that March night in 1993 remained hidden in the depths, preserved in darkness until technology and chance would finally bring it to light. The case of the missing Americans had gone cold, but the Nile's currents continued their ancient journey, flowing past the spot where 6 lives had been cut short. And in those depths, a waterproof camera waited silently, its film holding images that would eventually shatter the carefully constructed lies surrounding their disappearance. The first indication that the Nile was finally ready to give up its secrets came on a sweltering morning in June 2014. Dr. Yasmin Ali and her team of underwater archaeologists were conducting a routine survey of the riverbed, searching for artifacts from ancient Egyptian trade routes. Instead, they found something far more recent and far more disturbing. The sonar equipment first detected an anomaly, a distinctly angular shape that stood out against the natural contours of the riverbed. At first, Dr. Ali assumed they had discovered another sunken felucca, the traditional wooden sailing boats that had plied the Nile for centuries. But as their remote-operated vehicle transmitted the first grainy images, the team fell silent. There, resting in the silt nearly 70 feet below the surface, lay a perfectly preserved section of a modern cruise ship cabin. The structure had clearly been deliberately separated from a larger vessel, its edges showing signs of careful cutting rather than natural breakage. Coral and river debris had created a protective cocoon around the cabin, preserving it in an almost pristine state. The Discovery's location matched the approximate coordinates where the fishing boat captain had reported unusual nighttime activity 2 decades earlier. Dr. Ali immediately contacted the tourism police, and within hours, Inspector Rashid, now nearing retirement, arrived at the scene. His hands trembled as he reviewed the underwater footage, recognizing the distinctive blue and gold paint scheme of the pharaoh's glory. The recovery operation proved painstaking. Each piece of debris required careful documentation and preservation. When divers finally breached the cabin's sealed door, they discovered an underwater tomb. Personal effects floated eerily in the confined space: a woman's shoe, a man's watch stopped at 2:17, a waterlogged novel still marked with Lauren Murphy's bookmark. But the most significant discovery lay wedged beneath a displaced ceiling panel. Ross Anderson's camera, protected by a high-end waterproof case, had remained intact. The technical challenge of recovering data from the 21-year-old film seemed insurmountable at first. Yet through a combination of modern technology and painstaking restoration work, images slowly emerged from the damaged film. The photographs told a horrifying story. The final shots, taken in sequence, showed cruise director Mahmoud Hassan and 2 crew members confronting the group in the ship's cargo hold. Hassan appeared to be holding jewelry, his face contorted in anger. The last image captured a crew member advancing toward the camera, arms outstretched. Forensic examination of the recovered remains revealed evidence of violence. Grace Turner's skull showed signs of blunt force trauma. Rope fibers were found around Ian Rodriguez's wrists. The physical evidence, combined with Ross's photographs, painted a clear picture of the tourists' final moments. The discovery rocked the Egyptian tourism industry. International media descended on the recovery site, broadcasting images of the raised cabin section around the world. Sarah Anderson, now a mother herself, flew to Egypt to claim her parents' recovered belongings. Standing on the riverbank, clutching her father's camera, she finally had answers to questions that had haunted her for 21 years. Dr. Ali's team continued their methodical documentation of the site, uncovering more evidence with each passing day. They found Hassan's fingerprints preserved on a metal doorframe, directly linking him to the cabin's disposal. Tool marks on the cut edges matched equipment that had been aboard the Pharaoh's Glory. Every detail confirmed what investigators had long suspected, but could never prove. This had been no accident or voluntary disappearance. The most chilling aspect of the discovery was its deliberate nature. The cabin section had been carefully removed from the ship, weighted down, and sunk in one of the river's deepest points. This was not a panicked disposal but a calculated operation, suggesting experience and planning. The question now became not just who had murdered 6 American tourists, but how many other victims might lie beneath the Nile's waters. As news of the discovery spread, families of other missing tourists began contacting authorities. The pattern of disappearances spanning several years suddenly came into sharp focus. Hassan's name appeared in connection with multiple cruises where passengers had vanished, always with the same explanation of unscheduled disembarkments. The underwater tomb had kept its secret for 21 years, but now the truth could no longer be denied. 6 tourists had stumbled upon something they were never meant to see and paid for it with their lives. The discovery would force authorities to re-examine dozens of cold cases, revealing a pattern of crime that had gone undetected for far too long on the ancient waters of the Nile. The discovery of Ross Anderson's camera sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies on both sides of the Atlantic. Within days, a joint Egyptian FBI task force assembled in Cairo, occupying a makeshift command center filled with case files spanning 2 decades. The photographs, now carefully restored and enlarged, covered one wall's silent testimony to a crime that had gone unpunished for 21 years. Agent Jennifer Parker, pulled from retirement for this case, found herself staring at Mahmoud Hassan's personnel file. His employment history revealed a calculated pattern. He had worked on 5 different Nile cruise ships between 1988 and 1995, each marking the disappearance of at least 1 tourist. The coincidences were too numerous to ignore. Investigators began the painstaking process of tracking Hassan's movements through the years. They discovered he had left the cruise industry suddenly in 1995, shortly after the disappearance of an Australian family. He had moved between various tourism jobs along the Nile, always in positions that gave him access to wealthy foreign visitors. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former deckhand, now elderly and living in Alexandria, contacted the task force after seeing news reports about the underwater discovery. His hands shook as he described witnessing Hassan and 2 other crew members loading heavy cargo into the river late at night. "It happened more than once," he whispered to Inspector Rashid, "always after tourists went missing." Hassan's financial records told their own story. Irregular deposits appeared in his accounts following each disappearance, sums too large to explain with his modest salary. Investigators found evidence of jewelry sales matching descriptions of items missing from previous victims. The man had been methodically robbing and killing tourists for years, using the river to hide his crimes. But Hassan himself would never face justice. Records showed he had died in 2010 from a heart attack, taking many of his secrets to the grave. His death, however, loosened the tongues of his former accomplices. With their mastermind gone and evidence mounting, they began to talk. The full scope of Hassan's operation emerged through their confessions. He had developed a sophisticated system for identifying wealthy targets, usually choosing tourists traveling in small groups who had booked luxury suites. The 6 Americans had not been his intended victims that night. They had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, witnessing his murder of another passenger over a diamond necklace. The task force's investigation revealed a disturbing lack of oversight in Nile cruise operations during the 1990s. Ships regularly deviated from their routes without documentation. Security systems suffered convenient malfunctions. Port authorities accepted bribes to ignore irregularities. Hassan had exploited every weakness in the system. Sarah Anderson sat through hours of task force briefings, learning the truth about her parents' final hours. The evidence suggested they had tried to intervene when they witnessed Hassan's crime, their inherent sense of justice leading them to confront him rather than look the other way. Their moral courage had cost them their lives. As investigators dug deeper, they found connections to 12 confirmed victims over 5 years. Each case followed the same pattern: tourists vanishing without trace, their disappearances explained away as voluntary departures. Hassan had perfected his technique long before the Americans crossed his path. The investigation's findings forced significant changes in Nile cruise operations. New security protocols were implemented, crew background checks intensified, and vessel tracking systems became mandatory. But for the families of Hassan's victims, these changes came 2 decades too late. The task force's final report ran to over 1,000 pages, documenting a killing spree that had gone undetected for years. It revealed not just the actions of one murderous cruise director, but an entire system that had failed to protect innocent tourists. Hassan's death had spared him from facing justice, but his legacy forced the Egyptian tourism industry to confront its darkest chapter. In the end, the new investigation provided answers but little comfort. The 6 Americans had died trying to prevent another murder, their sense of right and wrong leading them to challenge a killer who had operated with impunity on the ancient waters of the Nile. Their story would become a catalyst for change, ensuring that future travelers would be protected from predators like Mahmoud Hassan. The breakthrough in the 21-year-old mystery began with a series of photographs, each one more damning than the last. As technicians carefully restored the images from Ross Anderson's waterlogged camera, they revealed the terrifying final moments of 6 American lives. Frame by frame, the truth emerged from the murky depths of time and water. The first salvageable image showed Mahmoud Hassan in the ship's cargo hold, clutching what appeared to be a diamond necklace. His face was contorted with rage, a far cry from the pleasant, professional demeanor he maintained for passengers. Behind him, 2 crew members blocked the only exit, their postures threatening. Subsequent photos captured the escalating confrontation. Grace Turner stood protectively in front of her brother Ethan, while Ross Anderson continued taking pictures, perhaps knowing they would be the only evidence of what was about to happen. Lauren Murphy appeared to be reaching for a ship's phone on the wall, her expression one of determination rather than fear. The final image was slightly blurred, showing a crew member lunging toward the camera. After that, darkness. The photos confirmed what investigators had long suspected, but could never prove. The 6 Americans had witnessed Hassan committing another crime and paid the ultimate price for their discovery. Forensic analysts meticulously studied every detail captured in the photographs. The timestamps aligned perfectly with Maria Santos's recollection of hearing voices at 2 in the morning. The cargo hold's layout matched blueprints of the Pharaoh's glory, and enhanced images revealed a blood spatter on Hassan's sleeve, evidence of an earlier violence that had drawn the Americans' attention. When confronted with the photographic evidence, Hassan's former accomplices finally broke their long silence. Ahmed Malik, a former security guard, was the first to confess. He described how Hassan had killed an elderly British passenger for her jewelry earlier that evening. The Americans, unable to sleep in the Egyptian heat, had been taking a late-night walk when they heard the struggle and investigated. Hassan was like a different person when discovered, Malik revealed during his confession. All that charm disappeared. He said no one would believe 6 missing tourists in Egypt was anything unusual. He'd done it before, he told us. Many times. The second accomplice, former engineer Karim Fawzi, provided the technical details of how they disposed of the evidence. The ship had been secretly modified with a removable hull section, allowing them to detach and sink the cabin without leaving visible damage to the vessel. The location had been carefully chosen, a deep section of the river where the strong current would usually prevent any recovery attempts. The photos also led investigators to other victims. In one image's background, a distinctive red suitcase was visible, matching the description of luggage belonging to a missing German tourist from 1994. Hassan's modus operandi became clear. He targeted wealthy passengers, murdered them for their valuables, and used the river to hide his crimes. Bank records subpoenaed after the photo discovery showed Hassan had sold jewelry matching victims' descriptions through various pawn shops in Cairo and Alexandria. The proceeds were laundered through a complex network of accounts, explaining how he had maintained his middle-class lifestyle while amassing considerable hidden wealth. Most chilling were the clues that showed how close investigators had come to discovering the truth years earlier. The fishing boat captain who reported unusual nighttime activity had actually witnessed one of Hassan's disposal operations. His subsequent disappearance took on new significance when records showed Hassan had visited his village shortly after he spoke to police. The recovered photos provided more than just evidence. They offered a window into the victims' final moments of courage. Rather than flee or bargain for their lives, the Americans had stood their ground, attempting to document the crime and prevent another murder. Their moral stand had cost them their lives, but ultimately exposed a killer who had operated with impunity for years. As the task force pieced together the sequence of events, they discovered Hassan had already killed another passenger that night before encountering the Americans. The elderly British woman's jewelry was found among items recovered from the sunken cabin, confirming she had been his intended victim all along. The 6 Americans had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, their sense of justice leading them to intervene rather than look the other way. The photographs became both evidence and memorial, capturing not just a crime, but the last moments of 6 lives cut short by a predator who had turned the majestic Nile into his hunting ground. They provided the answers that families had sought for 2 decades, though the truth they revealed was darker than anyone had imagined. In the aftermath of the investigation, the true scope of Mahmoud Hassan's crimes sent ripples through Egypt's tourism industry. Investigators confirmed 12 murders over 5 years, though some suspected the actual number might be higher. Each case followed the same pattern: wealthy tourists vanishing without trace, their disappearances explained away as voluntary departures from unscheduled stops. The evidence recovered from the sunken cabin led to multiple convictions. Ahmed Malik and Karim Fawzi received lengthy prison sentences for their roles in the murders. Their testimonies revealed a systematic operation that had exploited every weakness in Nile cruise security. Hassan had carefully selected his victims, targeting those whose disappearances would seem plausible to authorities accustomed to tourists deviating from planned itineraries. For the families of Hassan's victims, the resolution brought mixed emotions. Sarah Anderson spoke at the sentencing hearing, her voice steady as she addressed her parents' killers. "My father's last act was to document the truth," she said, holding up the restored camera. "He couldn't save himself, but he made sure you couldn't hide anymore." The Egyptian Tourism Ministry implemented sweeping reforms in response to the case. New regulations required continuous GPS tracking of all cruise vessels, mandatory security camera coverage with redundant recording systems, and rigorous background checks for crew members. The unscheduled stop policy, which Hassan had exploited so effectively, was eliminated entirely. Inspector Rashid, who had never fully abandoned the case, retired shortly after the trial. At his retirement ceremony, he displayed 6 photographs on his desk, one of each American victim. They were not just tourists, he told colleagues. They were heroes who died trying to prevent another murder. We owed them the truth. The site where the cabin was recovered became an unofficial memorial. Cruise ships now pause there briefly, while guides share the story as a reminder of changes their deaths inspired. The Anderson family, working with Egyptian authorities, established a foundation to fund enhanced security measures on Nile cruises and support families of victims of tourism-related crimes. Dr. Yasmin Ali's team continued to survey the river, locating 2 more sunken cabin sections containing remains of Hassan's earlier victims. Each discovery brought closure to another family, while revealing the staggering scale of his crimes. The technical innovations developed to investigate the underwater crime scenes revolutionized marine forensics. The case fundamentally changed how missing tourist cases are handled internationally. The FBI established new protocols for overseas disappearances, while Interpol created a dedicated unit for cruise ship crimes. The Hassan Protocols, as they became known, mandated immediate international cooperation when tourists vanish from vessels anywhere in the world. Grace Turner's daughter, born 6 months after her mother's disappearance, graduated from medical school the same week the case was finally closed. At her ceremony, she wore her mother's recovered necklace, a simple gold chain that had survived 2 decades underwater. "My mother died standing up to evil," she told her classmates. "That's a legacy I carry every day." The final chapter of the Pharaoh's Glory tragedy transformed Nile tourism. The river that had once concealed murders now carried vessels equipped with state-of-the-art security systems. Hassan's dark legacy led to reforms that made Egypt's ancient waterway safer for modern travelers, though the cost in human lives remained incalculable. 25 years after 6 Americans vanished into the Egyptian night, their story continues to be shared at police academies and tourism safety conferences worldwide. Their deaths exposed not just a killer, but an entire system that had failed to protect vulnerable travelers. The changes their sacrifice inspired ensure that future generations can safely experience the majesty of the Nile, while remaining vigilant against those who would exploit its mysteries for evil purposes.